The moment the courtroom doors opened, the noise evaporated, like mist in sunlight. Everyone turned their heads. Cameras stopped clicking. Whispers died mid-sentence. Ethan Carter walked in first, thin, pale, leaning heavily on his cane. Each step echoed across the marble floor of the Newark County Courthouse. Behind him followed his father, Samuel Carter, a man in his late 60s with iron-gray hair and eyes that carried the calm weight of storms long weathered. He wore a simple gray suit and carried an old leather briefcase, its handle worn smooth by decades of use. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of old wood and tension. Across the aisle, Vanessa Lowell, Ethan's ex-wife, sat perfectly poised at the defense table. Her emerald green dress shimmered under the overhead lights like envy itself. Next to her sat her attorney, Monica Hale, a woman known across New Jersey's legal circles for turning divorces into battlefields. Behind them, Vanessa's wealthy parents whispered and smirked, their tailored clothes screaming confidence and privilege. But that confidence began to flicker the moment Judge Anthony Keene entered. The courtroom stood as he made his way to the bench. His gavel struck once sharp, commanding. "You may be seated," he said. As the room settled, his gaze scanned the space with routine precision until it landed on Samuel Carter. The judge froze mid-breath. For a brief second, his face went pale, as though he had seen a ghost. His lips parted, barely forming a whisper. "Mr. Carter, why are you here?" Vanessa frowned, looking from the judge to Samuel with a trace of confusion. Monica Hale stiffened slightly, recognizing the name, but not yet placing it. Ethan glanced up from his seat, eyes darting nervously between them, unaware of the silent storm that had just begun. Samuel said nothing. He simply walked forward, steady, deliberate. The echo of his shoes on the wooden floor cut through the silence. He reached the defense table, set down his old briefcase, and the thud reverberated like a declaration of war. "I'm here for my son," he said quietly. Ethan's trembling hand found his father's beneath the table. The contact was small, but it steadied him. The judge leaned back slowly, still studying Samuel, as if trying to piece together a past that refused to stay buried. Across the aisle, Vanessa's painted lips curled into a mocking smile. "Well," she whispered to her mother, "it seems my poor ex-husband brought his daddy to fight for him. How touching." Her voice carried just enough for Samuel to hear. He didn't react. He simply adjusted his glasses and opened the briefcase. Inside were neatly stacked files, yellowed at the edges. Not legal documents, at least not yet, but blueprints, letters, and an envelope sealed with fading wax. To anyone else, it might have looked like clutter. To Samuel, it was the quiet arsenal of a man who never walked into battle unprepared. The clerk began reading out the case details. Divorce proceedings between Ethan Carter and Vanessa Lowell Carter. Petition for asset division and child custody. The formalities blurred into background noise as Samuel's mind drifted back to the promise he made to his late wife, Margaret, to protect their son, no matter what. He felt that same promise burning now, hotter than ever. From the corner of his eye, he caught the flash of a camera. Reporters had packed the back rows. The Lowell family's influence and Vanessa's beauty made this a public spectacle. But Samuel could sense they didn't come just for the drama. They came because something about this trial about him felt like history waiting to repeat itself. "Your Honor," Monica Hale began, standing with her trademark composure. "This case concerns my client, Mrs. Vanessa Lowell, who has endured years of hardship alongside her husband's decline, both physical and emotional. We will demonstrate that Mr. Carter is no longer capable of supporting his family or maintaining his parental responsibilities." Her words sliced cleanly through the air, practiced and merciless. Ethan lowered his head, shame washing over him. But Samuel's gaze never wavered. He'd seen this brand of cruelty before, the way privilege wrapped itself in eloquence to disguise greed. As Monica spoke, Vanessa crossed her legs and tapped her heels softly on the floor. Tap, 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 each click echoing like mock applause. Samuel's hand clenched around his pen. Then he heard the faintest sound, the judge clearing his throat. "Before we proceed," Judge Keene said slowly, eyes still on Samuel, "I need to confirm something. Mr. Carter, Were you once affiliated with the state ethics board? The question made the room stir. Monica turned sharply. Vanessa's smirk faltered. Even Ethan's head lifted, confusion in his eyes. Samuel met the judge's gaze. That was a long time ago, he said. The judge nodded once, his face unreadable. I remember, he murmured. Let's continue. Samuel sat, expression calm but heart pounding. That brief exchange had changed the entire temperature of the room. For years, he had lived quietly, content to be seen as a retired engineer, a widower, a father, no one of importance. But now, under the harsh courthouse lights, the past was beginning to breathe again. As the proceedings resumed, Ethan leaned closer, whispering, Dad, what's going on? Why did he look at you like that? Samuel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Don't worry, he said softly. Everything's going to be fine. But deep inside, Samuel knew nothing about this would be simple. He looked at Vanessa, her cold beauty like polished marble, and at her parents, whispering smugly. He felt the familiar hum of adrenaline, the one he used to feel before exposing corruption decades ago. He knew the game had already started, and this time he wasn't walking into it as a spectator. He was walking in as the storm. Long before the courthouse whispers and the cameras, the Carters had been an ordinary New Jersey family, quiet, humble, and tightly knit. Their small home stood on the outskirts of Trenton, where the sound of passing trains blended with the hum of Samuel Carter's old drafting table. Back then, Samuel was a chief structural engineer at Atlas Design Group, a firm that helped build half the bridges and overpasses connecting the state. His hands were steady, his mind sharp, and his reputation spotless. Colleagues often joked that if Samuel said a beam could hold, you could park a train on it. His wife Margaret was the kind of woman who could turn a small paycheck into a full dinner table. She laughed often, even when the bills stacked up, and always found time to sit beside Samuel in the evenings, sipping coffee while he reviewed blueprints. Their son, Ethan, was 10 when the world felt whole, a boy with wide eyes and endless curiosity, always asking how things worked, why bridges stood, why buildings didn't fall. When Margaret fell ill, Samuel's world began to tilt. She passed quietly one March morning, the first daffodils of spring blooming outside their window. Samuel didn't cry at the funeral. He stood still, jaw tight, one arm around Ethan's shoulders. That night, when the house finally fell silent, he whispered a promise into the darkness. I'll protect you, son. Always. Years passed, and Samuel lived by those words. He worked late, took freelance projects, and saved every penny for Ethan's education. His co-workers said he was obsessed, but to Samuel, obsession was another word for love. When Ethan was accepted to Rutgers University for civil engineering, Samuel nearly collapsed from relief. The day of Ethan's graduation, Samuel sat in the back row of the auditorium, clutching a small velvet box in his pocket, a vintage compass he'd once used during his first field project. When the ceremony ended, he pressed it into Ethan's hand. Keep this, Samuel said, his voice rough but steady. When the world shakes, find your true north. Ethan smiled through tears. I will, Dad. Life seemed to reward their perseverance. Within a few years, Ethan founded a small eco-construction company in Jersey City, specializing in sustainable materials. He named it Carter Buildworks, insisting that his father's name should live on the sign. Then came Vanessa Lowell, the daughter of a real estate developer from Atlantic City. She met Ethan during a corporate collaboration. Her laughter bright, her charm effortless. She had studied interior design, carried herself like someone raised under chandeliers, and yet, at least in the beginning, she seemed drawn to Ethan's honesty. Samuel remembered the first time she visited their house. She wore a sunflower yellow dress and brought a homemade pie. She called him Mr. Carter at first, then Dad by the third visit. She'd stand in the kitchen learning his chili recipe, teasing him for adding too much pepper. You like it to hurt a little, don't you? She'd laugh. For a while, Samuel allowed himself to believe that his family was whole again. On Sunday afternoons, he'd sit on the porch watching Ethan and Vanessa argue playfully over paint colors for their future home. When Ethan finally proposed, Samuel felt the kind of peace he hadn't known since Margaret's passing. Their wedding was small, only close friends and family. Vanessa's parents, Richard and Sylvia Lowell, arrived in matching silver attire and an air of quiet superiority. Samuel tried to ignore the way Richard spoke, each word dipped in condescension. "So, Mr. Carter," Richard said over champagne, "Ethan tells me you're in engineering. Admirable. A practical mind, though not the most lucrative field, I assume?" Samuel smiled politely. "It's not about the money, Mr. Lowell. It's about building something that lasts." Richard chuckled. "Ah, yes, romantic ideals. My world runs on something more predictable: interest rates." Vanessa's mother intervened with a false laugh, changing the subject, but the damage was done. From that day, Samuel understood the Lowells measured worth in bank statements, not integrity. Still, for Ethan's sake, he kept the peace. When Ethan and Vanessa moved into a newly built home near the lake in Morris County, Samuel visited every weekend, bringing groceries and tools. He helped install shelves, fixed a leaking pipe, and planted an orange tree in the backyard, a gift from Margaret's old garden. For the first few years, their lives felt almost perfect. Ethan's company grew rapidly, securing state contracts. Vanessa managed the design side, her eye for aesthetics, drawing wealthy clients. They had a son, Liam, with Margaret's green eyes and Ethan's crooked smile. Samuel adored him. Every Saturday, he'd bring Liam little puzzles and teach him how bridges carried weight. But somewhere along the way, the laughter in Vanessa's voice began to fade. She started working late, coming home with the faint scent of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. She changed her wardrobe, her hairstyle, even the tone she used with Ethan. Samuel noticed the difference long before Ethan did. Once, during a family dinner, Vanessa's phone buzzed. She excused herself, stepping out onto the porch. Through the window, Samuel caught her reflection smiling, whispering softly. When she came back, her face wore that polished calm he'd seen in her father. That night, after Ethan and Vanessa went upstairs, Samuel sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the dim light above the stove. He felt that old engineer's instinct, the sense that something beneath the surface was cracking. And cracks, if left unattended, always spread. He told himself not to interfere. Ethan was a grown man. Love, he thought, wasn't something a parent could repair with tools and blueprints. But the promise he had whispered over his wife's grave echoed louder than reason. "I'll protect you, son. Always." He didn't know then that the time to keep that promise was coming faster than he imagined, hidden behind steel beams, wet concrete, and a shadow waiting to strike. Because the day that changed everything began like any other. A bright morning, a construction site, and the sound of collapsing metal that tore the world apart. The morning the world collapsed began under a clean New Jersey sky. Ethan kissed Vanessa goodbye, grabbed his hard hat, and drove toward the construction site in Princeton. The new building was meant to be his company's pride, a modern eco-tower made of reinforced glass and solar panels. For months, he'd poured every ounce of himself into it. Samuel remembered that day vividly. He had been at home in Trenton, working on a small freelance design draft, when his phone rang. The call came from one of Ethan's foremen, his voice trembling through the static. "Mr. Carter, there's been an accident." By the time Samuel reached the hospital, sirens still rang in his ears. He ran through the sterile corridors, his heart pounding against his ribs. And then he saw his son. Ethan lay on the bed, wrapped in gauze, both legs heavily braced, a bruise spreading across his temple. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the metallic scent of blood. "Dad," Ethan whispered, his voice barely there. "The scaffolding, it wasn't right. I checked it the night before. Someone tampered with it." Samuel gripped his son's hand. "Don't talk. Just breathe." But inside, something cold settled in his chest. Ethan was not the careless type. If he said the scaffolding had been altered, it meant sabotage. Vanessa arrived an hour later, heels clicking, sunglasses still on indoors. She rushed to Ethan's side, kissed his forehead for the cameras waiting outside, then stepped away to take a call. Samuel watched her lean against the hallway wall, her voice low but impatient. "No, Dad, the insurance won't cover it unless we declare him unfit for site work. I'll handle it." Her words sliced through him. Unfit? Ethan had nearly died. He didn't need paperwork, he needed care. But the Lowells were already calculating profit and loss. Days blurred into nights at the hospital. Samuel stayed by Ethan's side, adjusting the blanket, reading the newspaper aloud, pretending everything would be fine. Vanessa appeared less often, once every few days, bringing designer flowers that wilted within hours. She smiled for the nurses, but when Ethan fell asleep, her expression hardened. "You'll need to think long-term," she told Samuel one night, her tone coldly practical. "Ethan can't manage the company anymore. He should sign power of attorney, so we can keep the contracts afloat." Samuel looked at her carefully. "You mean you want to run it?" "I mean someone has to. You think your son can walk a site again? Be realistic." He said nothing, only turned back to Ethan. Vanessa sighed, muttered something under her breath, and walked out. 2 weeks later, Ethan came home in a wheelchair. Samuel had converted the downstairs den into a makeshift bedroom. Every evening, Samuel would help his son transfer from chair to bed, his movements careful but heavy with guilt. "You'll walk again," he kept saying. But Ethan only nodded, his eyes distant. The house grew quiet, too quiet. Vanessa stopped sleeping there most nights. She said she was staying with her parents to manage paperwork. When she was home, her perfume lingered in rooms she barely entered, a reminder of distance rather than warmth. One afternoon, Samuel caught her pacing the kitchen, whispering sharply on the phone. "No, Connor, he won't suspect a thing. Once the house is in my name, you can move forward. Just make sure the zoning permits go through." Samuel froze in the doorway, every nerve on edge. Connor. He knew that name. Connor Reese, the developer whose company had once competed ruthlessly against Samuel's firm years ago. The same man, tied to questionable construction deals that had led to Samuel's quiet departure from Atlas. He stepped back before she noticed, his pulse roaring in his ears. Vanessa wasn't just drifting away, she was plotting, and she was working with Reese. That night, over dinner, Samuel watched her serve food with a hollow smile. Ethan barely ate, his appetite gone, his pride bleeding invisibly. Liam sat quietly at the table, poking at his vegetables. "Mom," he said softly, "are you staying home tonight?" Vanessa hesitated, then forced a laugh. "Of course, sweetheart." But her phone buzzed, and minutes later, she excused herself with a hurried excuse about urgent paperwork. The door closed. Silence swallowed the room. Samuel's hand trembled slightly as he poured himself water. He didn't drink it. He was thinking, calculating. Years of structural engineering had trained his mind to read pressure points. He knew when a foundation was about to crack, and this family's foundation was shaking violently. A week later, the final blow came. Samuel returned from the pharmacy and found a stack of papers on the kitchen table, divorce documents. Beside them, a note written in Vanessa's neat handwriting. "I deserve a real life. Not one spent babysitting a broken man." Ethan sat in his wheelchair by the window, silent. His hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. "Dad," he whispered hoarsely, "she's gone." Samuel approached slowly, kneeling beside him. "Then let her go. You're still standing, son. Maybe not with your legs, but here." He pressed a hand over Ethan's chest. "In here." But deep down, Samuel's thoughts were no longer about comfort. They were about answers. The scaffolding collapse, the insurance denial, the sudden connection to Connor Reese. He opened his laptop that night and began to search through old files from his Atlas days. Building permits, design blueprints, contractor names. His eyes caught one Reese Holdings LLC, a company that had been banned from state contracts 15 years ago after a whistleblower case. The whistleblower had been him. He leaned back slowly, realization cutting deep. Connor Reese hadn't forgotten. The accident wasn't just bad luck, it was payback. And Vanessa had walked straight into his trap, dragging Ethan with her. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Samuel stood at the window, staring into the storm. His reflection stared back, older, hardened, and suddenly awake. "They think they broke my son," he murmured. "But they have no idea who they just challenged." That night marked the end of the quiet engineer. From that point forward, Samuel Carter began to prepare not for comfort, but for war. The divorce papers stayed on the kitchen table for 3 days, like a silent intruder no one dared to touch. Ethan refused to sign them, though he stared at the pages every morning as if trying to make sense of his own life in legal ink. Vanessa had already moved back with her parents in Atlantic City, claiming she needed time to think. But everyone knew she had already made up her mind. One cold evening, Samuel found his son sitting in the dim light of the living room. The TV was on mute, showing a game Ethan once loved to watch. The crutches leaned against the wall, untouched. "I just want it to stop, Dad," Ethan whispered. "All of it. The pain, the looks, her voice." Samuel sat beside him. "Then we'll stop it the right way." Ethan shook his head. "What right way? She's got her father's lawyers. I can't even climb the courthouse stairs without help." Samuel's voice softened. "Then I'll climb them for you." He didn't mean it as poetry. He meant it as fact. The next morning, a luxury car stopped in front of their house. Vanessa stepped out in a tailored gray coat, her hair perfectly styled. Behind her came Monica Hale, her attorney, holding a sleek black portfolio. Samuel recognized her immediately. Years ago, she had been a junior associate at a rival firm that once tried to destroy his reputation. Now she stood in his kitchen, pretending to look professional. "Mr. Carter," she said smoothly, "Mrs. Lowell Carter is here to settle this amicably. We'd prefer to avoid unnecessary court time." Samuel crossed his arms. "Amicably? You mean you want my son to surrender?" Monica's lips curved slightly. "Your son is in no condition to manage finances or care for a child. We're willing to offer a generous arrangement if he signs today." Vanessa pulled off her gloves with deliberate slowness. "Half the house's value, full custody of Liam, and we'll drop all claims against his company. That's fair, isn't it?" Ethan's voice trembled. "You're taking everything, Vanessa. You're taking my son." Vanessa looked at him with practiced pity. "I'm taking responsibility, Ethan. You can't raise a child when you can barely walk." Samuel's hand tightened around the armrest. "You're not taking a damn thing," he said quietly. Vanessa's eyes flashed. "You can't stop this. The law's on my side." Monica closed her folder. "You should read the fine print, Mr. Carter. Under New Jersey marital property statutes, shared residence—" "I know the law," Samuel interrupted. His tone was sharp, commanding. "Better than you think." The lawyer paused. For a split second, the confidence on her face faltered. When they left, the house fell into a silence so deep it hurt. Ethan sat motionless, staring at the unsigned papers. "Dad," he said finally, "maybe it's better if I just give her what she wants. I don't want Liam dragged into this." Samuel turned sharply. "Don't ever say that again." "But she'll win," Ethan murmured. "She always wins." Samuel crouched beside him, his face level with his son's. Then it's time she met someone who doesn't play by her script. That night, as rain battered the windows, Samuel stayed awake in the kitchen. He laid out every document he'd kept over the years, copies of property deeds, receipts, old contracts. His mind worked methodically, like an engineer analyzing a blueprint for weakness. He found the one line that could save them: the date of purchase. Ethan had bought the house 6 months before the wedding. That meant it was non-marital property under New Jersey law. No matter what Vanessa claimed, she couldn't touch it. But property wasn't the only thing at stake. Samuel remembered the tremor in Liam's voice the last time he visited. "Grandpa," the boy had whispered, "Mom says I have to say Daddy can't take care of me. I don't want to lie." The words had crushed him. Vanessa wasn't just greedy, she was teaching her child to twist the truth. That night, Samuel made a promise not only to his son, but to his grandson too. At dawn, he drove to a small diner outside Trenton to meet an old acquaintance, Detective Paul Vance, a retired investigator Samuel had once worked with during a state ethics case. Paul looked older, heavier, but his eyes were still sharp. "Carter," he greeted, shaking his head with a grin. "Didn't think I'd see you again. You used to say you were done fighting." Samuel stirred his coffee. "I was, until they came for my son." Paul leaned forward. "Tell me what you need." "I need proof," Samuel said. Something that connects Vanessa to Connor Reese. I know they're working together. I just can't prove it yet. Paul nodded slowly. Reese is still up to his neck in dirty money. He funds half the shady development projects across the coast. If Vanessa's involved, I'll find it. When Samuel got home, he found Ethan sitting with Liam, reading aloud from an old book about bridges. For a moment, he saw a glimpse of peace. But when Ethan noticed him, there was something else in his eyes, fear mixed with exhaustion. "Dad," Ethan said quietly. She called. "The hearing's in 2 weeks." Samuel nodded. "Then we have 2 weeks to remind them who they're dealing with." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Samuel looked down at his old leather briefcase, the one he hadn't touched since the day he left the ethics board. He brushed the dust off the handle. "I mean," he said, voice low and deliberate, "it's time for the engineer to return to the field." Outside, the storm clouds gathered again over Trenton. But inside that small house, Samuel Carter's calm was not weakness. It was the silence before thunder. Rain streaked across the windshield as Samuel's car rolled into the cracked parking lot of a forgotten building near Elizabeth, New Jersey. Inside, behind a flickering neon sign that read, "Vance Investigations," the air smelled of old coffee and dust. Detective Paul Vance sat behind his desk, leaning back in a creaky chair, eyes sharp despite the years. "You look exactly the same," Samuel said as he walked in, closing his umbrella. Paul chuckled. "You, on the other hand, look like a man who hasn't slept since Reagan was president. Sit down." Samuel handed him a folder. "Everything I have, contracts, bank statements, emails from Ethan's company. I need to know how Connor Reese connects to my daughter-in-law." Paul flipped through the papers, whistling softly. "Reese again. He's like a ghost, you never see him, but his money leaves footprints everywhere. I'll run this through some contacts in Atlantic City. If Vanessa's taking payments, I'll find them." Samuel nodded. "I need proof before the hearing, enough to expose them both." Paul lit a cigarette, squinting through the smoke. "You still playing the quiet hero, Sam? You sure you want to open that door again? Last time you did, half of Trenton's business elite went down, and you almost did with them." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Last time I was fighting for ethics. This time I'm fighting for family." Paul studied him for a moment, then stubbed out the cigarette. "Give me 48 hours. When Samuel drove home that night, the streets of Trenton gleamed under the rain. His headlights reflected off puddles like fractured mirrors. The closer he got to his house, the heavier his thoughts became. The past had never left him, it had just been waiting. In his small study, Samuel unlocked an old metal cabinet. Inside were relics from another life, yellowed clippings, sealed envelopes, and a framed commendation from the New Jersey State Ethics Board. Beneath it lay a stack of files labeled Atlas, divided by Reese Holdings, 2009. He hesitated, then opened them. Inside were photocopies of reports he'd written 15 years earlier, exposing Reese's fraudulent safety inspections and political bribes. Those documents had cost Samuel his position. He remembered the day clearly, the firm's board turning on him, the threats, the anonymous letters telling him to stay quiet. He hadn't realized until now that Reese had simply gone underground, rebranding his empire, waiting for a chance to strike back. The phone rang at midnight. Samuel's heart jumped. "It's Paul," the voice rasped. "You were right. I found transfers from Reese's offshore account, 5 payments to Vanessa's design firm in the last 3 months, labeled as consulting fees. It's a cover-up, but the trail's solid." Samuel closed his eyes. "That's it. That's the link." "Sam, there's more," Paul added quietly. "Reese filed new property development plans right where Ethan's house stands. He wants the land for a luxury riverfront complex. He's using Vanessa to get it." Samuel gripped the phone, anger surging through his veins. "Send me everything you have." "I'll drop it off tomorrow," Paul said. "But Sam, be careful. Reese doesn't forgive twice." When morning came, Samuel was already waiting on the porch, coffee steaming beside him. The first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, revealing a neighborhood still asleep. In that quiet, Samuel made a decision. He would not only defend Ethan, he would dismantle the men who had built their power on deceit. That afternoon, he visited the small firm that once handled his ethics cases. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw his ID card. "Mr. Carter, I thought you retired years ago." "I did," he said, handing her a USB drive. "But I need these documents verified for court. Property records, purchase dates, and chain of title confirmation, confidentially." Her hands trembled as she took them. "Of course." By evening, Samuel sat at his kitchen table, papers spread like a war map. Ethan joined him, leaning on his cane. "Dad," he said softly, "you're digging into something dangerous." Samuel looked up. "You think danger scares me after what they did to you?" Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand. Vanessa's father knows everyone in Atlantic City politics. If you go after them, then let them come," Samuel interrupted. "I'm not hiding any more." Ethan was silent for a long time. Then, quietly, he said, "You are always stronger than me." Samuel shook his head. "No, son. I just learned to survive longer." Later that night, while Ethan slept, Samuel opened the envelope Paul had delivered. Inside were photographs. Grainy shots of Vanessa entering the Harbor Light Hotel with Connor Reese, her hand brushing his arm, her laughter captured mid-frame. Another photo showed her signing papers in a dim restaurant booth. Samuel stared at them for a long time. His heart broke, not from anger, but from disbelief that someone could betray so easily, so coldly. He placed the photos beside a framed picture of his late wife, Margaret. Her eyes in the photo seemed to ask the question he'd been avoiding. "What will you do now?" Samuel whispered, "I'll finish what I started years ago." He slid the evidence into his briefcase, the same worn leather one that had gathered dust for a decade. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out the old compass he'd given Ethan years ago, its glass cracked but still pointing true north. For a moment, he held it tightly, feeling the steady pull of direction. The next morning, he would walk into that courtroom, not as a retired engineer, not as a broken man's father, but as Samuel Carter, the man who once brought giants to their knees. And this time, he intended to finish the job. The morning of the first hearing broke cold and pale over Newark. Samuel Carter stood in front of the mirror, tightening the knot of his old Navy tie, the one he used to wear when testifying before the State Ethics Board. The reflection staring back at him looked older, but the eyes hadn't changed. They were steady, deliberate, and sharper than most men half his age. Ethan waited by the door, dressed in a dark suit, his cane resting against the frame. His shoulders slumped, but there was a quiet strength in his posture. "You don't have to go in there, Dad," he said softly. "This is my mess." Samuel turned. "You're my son. That makes it my battle too." Outside, the streets were slicked from the night's drizzle. The courthouse loomed ahead, gray against the morning sky. A small crowd had gathered near the steps, reporters, photographers, curious locals. The Lowell family knew how to attract attention, and the case had turned into public theater. When Samuel and Ethan entered the courtroom, whispers rippled across the benches. Vanessa was already seated at the defendant's table, her hair styled perfectly, a calm smile painted on her lips. Her attorney, Monica Hale, leaned close to whisper something, and Vanessa laughed softly, the sound cutting like glass. Judge Anthony Keene entered moments later. The room rose. Samuel caught the judge's brief hesitation again, an unspoken recognition that hung between them. The gavel struck once, echoing through the chamber. "This court is now in session," the judge said. Monica stood first, her voice clear and sharp. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Vanessa Lowell Carter, seeks a fair and legal division of marital assets. She has endured years of hardship, caring for a husband who, tragically, can no longer provide stability for their child. We will also present evidence that Mr. Ethan Carter's home was purchased during their engagement, and therefore qualifies as shared property." She smiled faintly and sat down. Samuel remained still, his hands folded over the leather briefcase on his lap. Ethan glanced at him nervously. "Dad, maybe we should—" But Samuel was already rising. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "before any evidence is presented, I wish to identify myself for the record." Judge Keene nodded. Proceed. Samuel stepped forward, his footsteps steady, deliberate. He placed his briefcase on the table with a soft thud. My name is Samuel Carter, former chief structural engineer at Atlas Design Group, former consultant to the New Jersey State Ethics Board, and as of this moment, legal representative for my son, Ethan Carter. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The reporters scribbled furiously. Vanessa's confident smile faltered. Monica Hale's pen froze mid-stroke. Mr. Carter, the judge said slowly, are you representing your son pro se? Yes, Your Honor, Samuel replied. With the court's permission. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Permission granted. Monica regained her composure quickly. Your Honor, while I respect Mr. Carter's professional history, this case concerns family law, not engineering ethics. His past credentials, impressive as they may be, are irrelevant. Samuel looked at her. You're right about one thing, Miss Hale. This case isn't about engineering. It's about structure, the structure of truth. And truth, like any foundation, doesn't crumble because someone paints the walls differently. The courtroom quieted again. Even the judge's clerk stopped typing. Samuel opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. Your Honor, Exhibit 1, the official deed of Ethan Carter's residence in Morris County. Dated 6 months prior to the marriage. Verified by the State Records Office. This document proves the property was acquired solely by my son before the union. He handed the papers to the clerk, who carried them to the bench. Judge Keene examined the signatures, his brow furrowing. Monica tried to object. The residence served as their shared home for over 6 years, Your Honor. Under state statute, Samuel cut in smoothly. Under statute 2 amperes, 34 to 23, non-marital property remains separate unless the deed is legally transferred or co-signed. Neither occurred. I have notarized copies confirming that. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. Is that accurate, Miss Hale? Monica hesitated. I'll need to verify the authenticity of those copies. Judge Keene nodded, his tone firm. You'll have your chance. For now, the exhibit stands. Across the room, Vanessa's mother shifted uncomfortably. Her father leaned forward, whispering urgently. Vanessa's face, once perfectly composed, began to tighten. Samuel continued, his voice measured but heavy with quiet authority. Your Honor, there's another matter. I intend to demonstrate that this case extends beyond divorce. It involves coercion, manipulation, and deliberate deceit directed not only at my son, but at my grandson. The room went silent again. Vanessa's chair creaked as she turned sharply toward him. That's a lie, she snapped. You're trying to make me look like some villain. Samuel's tone stayed calm. You made that choice yourself, Mrs. Lowell. The judge struck his gavel once. Mrs. Lowell Carter, control yourself. She sank back into her seat, eyes flashing. Samuel closed the briefcase and placed both hands on the table. For years, I designed bridges strong enough to endure hurricanes. I learned something from that work. Weak foundations collapse not because of storms, but because of what's hidden underneath. Today, we're going to uncover what's underneath this marriage. Judge Keene nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Then I suggest you be prepared, Mr. Carter. This court does not handle emotion, it handles evidence. Samuel's mouth curved into a faint smile. Good, Your Honor. I brought plenty. From behind him, Ethan whispered, Dad, I didn't know you still had it in you. Samuel didn't turn. His eyes stayed locked on the defense table. Neither did they. Outside, thunder rolled again over Newark, distant yet steady, like a warning that the storm Samuel Carter had kept buried for 15 years was finally about to break. 2 weeks later, the courthouse was overflowing. Reporters pressed against the marble walls. Camera flashes flickered like lightning. Everyone wanted to witness the second hearing, the day the retired engineer who once vanished from public life returned to face the elite of New Jersey head-on. Samuel and Ethan entered quietly, ignoring the noise. Ethan's cane clicked on the floor, slow but determined. Behind them, a young boy's voice called, Grandpa, wait! It was Liam, escorted by a court guardian. The judge had permitted the child to testify, but only if the room remained respectful. Samuel bent down, smoothing the boy's hair. "You'll be brave, right?" Liam nodded solemnly. "Like you taught me." When Judge Keene entered, the crowd fell silent. His eyes swept across the room before settling on Samuel. "Mr. Carter, the court is ready for your evidence." Samuel rose, calm as ever. "Thank you, Your Honor. Today I present 2 exhibits, one about property, one about truth." He opened his leather briefcase, placing a small USB drive on the table. The sound of the metal clasp snapping open echoed through the still air. "This recording was captured in my son's home 2 weeks ago," he said. "It contains the voice of Mrs. Vanessa Lowell Carter instructing her child to commit perjury." The courtroom gasped. Vanessa's lawyer, Monica Hale, shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Illegally obtained." "Overruled," said the judge, his tone crisp. "Proceed, Mr. Carter." Samuel gestured to the clerk, who connected the device to the court's sound system. The first voice that filled the room was Vanessa's sharp, impatient. "Liam, you have to say your dad can't take care of you. Tell the judge you're scared of him, or we'll lose everything." Then came Liam's small, trembling reply. "But I don't want to lie, Mom. I love Dad." And Vanessa's chilling response, "Do it, or you'll regret it." The words hit like thunder. Gasps broke through the courtroom. Even the reporters stopped writing. Ethan lowered his head, tears glinting in his eyes. Vanessa jumped up, her voice shrill. "That's fake! He edited that! It's all lies!" Samuel didn't look at her. "Lies," he said quietly, "tend to sound different when they echo." The judge raised his hand. "Enough. We will verify authenticity through audio forensics." But the voice patterns seemed clear. Monica tried to recover. "Even if this is real, it doesn't change the financial case. The property was still shared." Samuel's calm didn't waver. "Then let's talk about the property." He lifted another folder. Inside were photographs, contracts, and transfer logs. These documents show a series of payments from an offshore account belonging to Connor Reese, the same developer whose safety violations cost workers' lives 15 years ago. 5 transfers, totaling $120,000, were sent to Mrs. Lowell Carter's design firm, under the label consulting fees. Judge Keene leaned forward. "Are these verified?" "Yes, Your Honor," Samuel replied. "And each payment corresponds with a withdrawal from Mr. Reese's real estate development fund tied directly to the land where my son's house sits." Whispers swept through the room. Monica's face drained of color. Vanessa turned toward her, whispering furiously, but Monica wouldn't meet her eyes. Samuel's voice grew stronger, every syllable deliberate. "This wasn't a divorce, it was a transaction. My daughter-in-law sold her husband's property in advance to a man who spent 2 decades trying to destroy my family." Vanessa slammed her hands on the table. "You think you're so righteous, Samuel? You ruined Connor's company back then. You cost us everything." The courtroom froze, the admission hung heavy in the air. Samuel stepped closer. "So it was revenge." Vanessa's lips trembled. "He promised he'd take care of me. He said all I had to do was make Ethan sell the house." Her voice cracked, the arrogance collapsing under its own weight. "I didn't think it would go this far." The judge's voice thundered. "Mrs. Lowell Carter, are you confirming financial cooperation with Connor Reese?" Vanessa's silence was answer enough. Monica Hale sank into her chair, defeated. But Samuel wasn't done. He took a breath, then pulled one last envelope from his case. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "before you pass judgment, there's one more truth to tell, one that belongs to me." He turned toward the courtroom, toward his son. "Years ago, I worked for a firm that built half this state's infrastructure. When I discovered falsified safety reports, I went public. I thought doing the right thing would protect people, but it ruined me. Reese paid off the board, and I was forced to resign. That's why I disappeared. That's why I kept silent." Ethan looked up, tears welling. The truth hit him like a second collapse. "I never told you, son," Samuel continued, voice low, "because I didn't want you to carry my battles. But now I see silence protects no one." Judge Keene sat back slowly, eyes glinting with recognition. "Mr. Carter, I remember. You testified in my first ethics trial. You exposed the bribes that nearly cost me my license. Without you, I wouldn't be sitting here today." The courtroom erupted again. Reporters whispered, "He's the whistleblower from the Atlas case." Samuel's voice steadied. "I didn't come here for revenge. I came here for justice, for my son, for my grandson, and for every man who's been broken by corruption." The judge struck his gavel 3 times. "Order!" When silence returned, he spoke with gravity. "This court will not be manipulated by greed or deceit. We'll reconvene for final verdict tomorrow morning." As everyone rose, Vanessa collapsed back into her seat, pale and shaking. Her parents rushed to her side, their faces ashen. Across the aisle, Ethan reached for his father's hand, gripping it tightly. "Dad," he whispered, voice cracking, "you didn't just defend me, you defended yourself." Samuel's expression softened. "No," he said quietly, squeezing his son's hand. "I defended what's left of decency." When they stepped outside, rain began to fall again, over Newark, soft at first, then steady, washing the courthouse steps clean. Paul Vance was waiting by the curb, leaning against his car. "You did it, Carter. Reese's office was raided an hour ago. They found the rest of the contracts." Samuel looked up at the dark clouds, breaking apart above the skyline. "Good," he said, his voice calm. "It's time the truth stopped hiding underground." And as he stood there, rain soaking into his shoulders, Samuel Carter realized that after 15 long years, the storm that had haunted his family was finally starting to clear. The next morning dawned clear and golden, as if the storm had washed New Jersey clean overnight. For the first time in weeks, sunlight spilled through the tall courthouse windows, gilding the wooden benches and the tired faces of everyone who had lived through the trial. Samuel and Ethan sat side by side, their hands folded, silent but steady. Liam leaned against his father's arm, whispering, "Are we going to win, Grandpa?" Samuel smiled faintly. "We already did, kiddo. We told the truth." When Judge Keene entered, the room fell quiet. No cameras flashed this time. No murmurs rippled through the audience. There was only the slow, deliberate voice of justice. After reviewing all submitted evidence, recordings, and testimony, the judge began, "This court finds the claims of Mrs. Vanessa Lowell Carter to be without merit. The residence in Morris County is confirmed as non-marital property, and full custody of the minor, Liam Carter, is awarded to his father, Mr. Ethan Carter." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before continuing. "Furthermore, this court recommends a separate investigation into the financial transactions between Mrs. Lowell Carter and developer Connor Reese." Vanessa gasped audibly. Her lawyer sat motionless, eyes downcast. Judge Keene looked toward Samuel. "Mr. Carter, though you are not the plaintiff of record, your service to this court and to the state of New Jersey, past and present, will not be forgotten." His tone softened. "You reminded us that integrity has no expiration date." He struck the gavel once, firmly. "Court adjourned." The sound echoed like the closing of a chapter. Reporters rushed forward, but Samuel raised a hand, protecting Ethan and Liam as they made their way outside. The sunlight hit them full on, warm and brilliant. Ethan blinked against it, tears sliding silently down his face. He turned to his father. "Dad, I don't even know how to thank you." Samuel placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "You already did, the moment you stood up for yourself. That's all the thanks I need." He looked down at Liam, whose small fingers were clutching his briefcase. "Grandpa," the boy said softly, "Mom's gone?" Samuel nodded slowly. "For now. But people change, Liam. What matters is that we don't." The 3 of them stood for a moment on the courthouse steps. The city alive around them, the rush of buses, the cry of gulls from the river, the hum of a world moving forward. For Samuel, it felt like breathing after years underwater. Days later, news broke that Connor Reese had been arrested on charges of fraud and bribery. Vanessa's parents quietly sold their Atlantic City holdings and disappeared from the public eye. Vanessa herself withdrew from the proceedings entirely, her lawyer confirming she'd left the state. The Carters didn't celebrate loudly. There were no toasts, no champagne, only quiet dinners, and the sound of laughter returning to a house that had once fallen silent. Ethan began physical therapy again, this time with determination rather than despair. Each painful step was a victory. Liam cheered for him after every session, waving his crayon drawings from the sidelines. One evening, weeks after the verdict, the three of them sat by the lake behind their home. The sun was setting, its reflection rippling on the water like molten gold. Samuel held a mug of coffee in both hands, breathing in the crisp air that carried the scent of pine and wet soil. Ethan joined him on the porch, moving slower but standing taller. "The doctor says I'll be walking without the cane by next spring," he said with a quiet smile. Samuel nodded. "That's good. Your mother would be proud." They both looked toward the old orange tree in the yard, the one Samuel had planted years ago. It was taller now, its branches heavy with fruit. Liam ran circles around it, laughing, chasing a small paper airplane. After a while, Ethan said, "You could have stayed retired, Dad. You didn't have to dig up all those memories." Samuel chuckled softly. "Son, I spent my life designing things meant to last. Bridges, towers, roads. But the strongest thing I ever built was you. You don't abandon what you build, no matter how damaged it gets." Ethan looked down, his eyes glistening. "You didn't just save my house. You saved me." Samuel reached out, resting a hand on his son's arm. "No," he said gently. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you where your foundation was." As the last light of day faded, Liam came running up the porch steps, holding his paper airplane. "Grandpa, look! It went so high it touched the clouds." Samuel laughed, taking the plane from his hand. "That's the secret. Liam builds something true, and it'll always fly." They sat together, the three generations of Carters, watching the lake shimmer under the dying Sunday. Crickets began to sing, and the evening breeze rustled the orange leaves. Samuel thought of Margaret, of the promise he'd made long ago to protect his family no matter what. He'd kept that promise, and in doing so, he'd found something greater than vindication. He'd found peace. He took a slow breath, feeling the warmth of home behind him, and the weight of the years finally lift from his shoulders. In the end, he realized that life is like the structures he once designed, subject to storms, but built to endure. What matters is not what falls apart, but what we rebuild stronger afterward. And as the night settled in, Samuel whispered to the quiet air, "Justice doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right hands to lift it again." The lake glowed softly under the moonlight, and for the first time in years, Samuel Carter knew the world was steady beneath his feet.